May 19th, 1780. New England. It's 10 in the morning, and the sky is turning black. Not cloudy, not stormy, black. Roosters are crowing because they think night has fallen. Cows are walking back into their barns. Birds have gone completely silent. In Hartford, Connecticut, the Governor's Council is in session, and half the room is convinced the world is ending right now, mid-sentence. A man named Colonel Abraham Davenport is sitting in that room. Someone screams that they should adjourn, that Judgment Day has arrived, and they should be found praying, not legislating. And Davenport, according to legend, says something that gets carved into New England folklore forever. I am against adjournment. The day of judgment is either approaching or it is not. If it is not, there is no cause for adjournment. If it is, I choose to be found doing my duty. Bring in the candles. They lit candles at noon in May. People genuinely believed they were watching the sixth seal of Revelation break open in real time. The part of the Bible that says the sun will turn black as sackcloth of hair. Diaries from that day describe rain that looked like ink, soot falling from the sky, and a darkness so complete that people couldn't read a clock face at arm's length. Here's the unsettling part. This wasn't a one-off. This has happened again and again throughout recorded history. The sun going dark, without an eclipse, without warning, and without anyone at the time having a clue why. And the real explanation, once scientists finally pieced it together centuries later, turned out to be far stranger and far more relevant to us right now in 2026 than anyone in that Connecticut State House could have imagined. Because today, scientists really are worried about a black sun event, just not the one you're picturing. Stick with me, because this story goes from colonial New England to a medieval apocalypse nobody talks about, to a satellite orbiting 1,000,000 miles from Earth right now, built for one job, to watch the sun so it doesn't catch us off guard again. Let's start with what actually happened in 1780. Because the real cause is almost more unsettling than apocalypse. For decades, nobody could explain New England's dark day. Some blamed a solar eclipse, but there wasn't one scheduled anywhere close to that date. Some blamed the will of God, full stop, end of discussion. It wasn't until the 21st century that dendrochronologists, scientists who study tree rings, went digging through fire-scarred tree samples in Ontario and found their answer. A massive wildfire event scorched the forests of what's now Canada that same spring. The smoke and ash plume drifted south and sat directly over New England like a lid, thick enough to blot out the midday sun entirely. No supernatural cause, just smoke. But here's the thing that should give you chills. The people living through it had no way of knowing that. They had no satellites, no wildfire tracking, no atmospheric science. All they had was a sky that had gone the color of a bruise and a religious text that predicted exactly this moment. That's the pattern we're going to trace throughout this whole story. Moments when the sun visibly, undeniably dims or darkens, entire civilizations panic and reach for apocalyptic explanations, and it takes science decades or even centuries to catch up and explain what actually happened. And the terrifying twist is this: we are not done having these moments. In fact, the modern version might be the most dangerous one yet. But before we get to today, we need to go back much further than 1780, because there's a darkening event buried in history that's so extreme, so well documented, and so strangely overlooked that historians have a nickname for the year it happened. They call it the worst year to be alive. Forget one dark morning. Imagine 18 months. In the year 536 AD, a Byzantine historian named Procopius, a guy who literally worked in the imperial court and wrote history for a living, recorded something so strange that for over 1,000 years, historians treated it as exaggeration or myth. He wrote that the sun gave off light without brightness like the moon for the entire year. Crops failed across the Mediterranean. Snow fell in summer in China. Tree rings from Ireland to Siberia to the Sierra Nevada mountains all show the same signature. 536 AD was the single worst growing year in over 2,000 years of recorded tree growth. A monk in Mesopotamia named John of Ephesus wrote that the sun was dark and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow. People at the time didn't have the concept of a volcano affecting global climate. What they had was the book of Revelation, and Revelation chapter 6 describes an earthquake, a black sun, and a blood-red moon in the exact same breath. So that's what they concluded. The sixth seal had opened. Christendom, and separately the Persian and Chinese empires on the complete other side of the planet, all recorded the same dread, all read it through their own end times lens. Here's the part that took modern science almost 1,500 years to solve. In 2018, a team of climate scientists drilled an ice core out of a Swiss glacier and layer by layer found a spike of volcanic sulfate dated with extraordinary precision to early 536 AD, followed by 2 more massive eruptions in 540 and 547, 3 back-to-back volcanic winters. The likely culprit for the first? A colossal eruption in Iceland, so violent it threw enough sulfur into the stratosphere to dim the sun worldwide and drop global temperatures by as much as 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit for the better part of a decade. Historians now connect this triple punch of climate collapse to crop failures, famine, and, brutally, to the conditions that let the plague of Justinian explode a few years later, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people. So an entire civilization's darkest, most apocalyptic memory, one they wrote into religious interpretation for over a millennium, turned out to have a scientific fingerprint frozen in alpine ice the whole time. Nobody thought to look until the tools existed to look. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What modern events are we currently explaining wrong simply because we don't have the right instruments yet? That question brings us to the real reason scientists are watching the sun nervously right now, and it has nothing to do with smoke or volcanoes at all. September 1st, 1859. A British astronomer named Richard Carrington is doing something totally routine, sketching sunspots through a telescope projected onto a screen in his private observatory, when he sees something no one has ever documented before. A blinding white flash erupts from a sunspot cluster, lasting about 5 minutes. He'd just become the first human being to witness a solar flare. 17 hours later, Earth got hit. Telegraph systems across Europe and North America went haywire. Operators reported getting electric shocks off their equipment. Telegraph paper spontaneously caught fire in some stations. Some operators found they could disconnect their batteries entirely and still send messages, powered purely by the electrical current the storm was inducing directly into their wires. The aurora borealis, normally an Arctic phenomenon, was visible as far south as Cuba, Hawaii, and Colombia. In the Rocky Mountains, gold miners woke up at 1 a.m. and started making breakfast, convinced from the bright red and green sky that morning had come. This was a coronal mass ejection, a billion-ton belch of magnetized plasma launched from the sun, slamming directly into Earth's magnetic field. In 1859, the most sophisticated piece of electrical technology humanity owned was the telegraph. That's all that got fried. Now, fast forward to today and ask the question every space weather scientist at NOAA and NASA loses sleep over.
What happens when a Carrington-class storm hits a planet that runs on GPS, satellite banking networks, cell towers, and most critically, a power grid held together by transformers that take, in some cases, over a year to manufacture and replace? We actually got a preview. In March 1989, a solar storm smaller than the Carrington event knocked out the entire Hydro-Quebec power grid in about 90 seconds, plunging 6 million people into darkness in the dead of winter. And in July 2012, NASA satellites recorded a Carrington-scale coronal mass ejection tearing through the exact orbital path Earth occupies, except Earth had rotated out of the way just 9 days earlier. Physicist Daniel Baker of the University of Colorado, who studied the event, put the odds of a direct hit
within the next decade at around 12%, and estimated that if it had struck Earth, recovery could have taken years and cost the global economy over $2 trillion. We missed it by 9 days. 9 days between headline news and what some researchers have bluntly called a potential internet apocalypse. That's the real, documented, peer-reviewed reason space agencies built and launched satellites like DS Cover, parked 1 million miles from Earth at a gravitational balance point, staring directly at the sun 24/7, buying us roughly 15 to 60 minutes of warning before a solar storm's leading edge reaches our planet. 15 to 60 minutes. That's the entire margin between prepare the grid and lose the grid. But here's where the story turns from unsettling to genuinely mysterious, because Carrington isn't even close to the worst-case scenario scientists have found evidence for. There's something bigger, something we only discovered in 2012, hidden inside a tree in Japan. In 2012, a Japanese physicist named Fusami Miyake was studying carbon-14 levels in ancient Japanese cedar tree rings, a totally different research goal, when she found something that made zero sense. A massive, sudden spike in radioactive carbon isotopes dated precisely to the year 774 or 775 AD. Not a gradual increase, a spike contained in a single year's growth ring, roughly 20 times larger than anything solar activity should be able to produce. At first, some scientists proposed a nearby supernova. Others floated a gamma-ray burst. But when researchers went back through ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland, they found a matching beryllium-10 spike from the exact same year. And beryllium-10 is produced by cosmic and solar particles hitting the atmosphere, not by a supernova. The evidence increasingly points to an extreme solar particle storm, potentially dozens of times more powerful than anything in the modern satellite record, including Carrington. And then it got stranger. Scientists went looking for more of these signatures and found them. A second Miyake event around 993 AD, a third dated to roughly 660 BC, a fourth, potentially the largest yet identified, dated to around 12,350 years ago at the tail end of the last ice age. As of the most recent tree ring surveys, researchers have now identified around 6 to 8 of these extreme events, stretching back thousands of years, occurring roughly once every 1,000 to 1,500 years, seemingly at random, with no reliable pattern to predict the next one. Here's the sentence that should actually worry you. Nobody knows for certain what triggers a Miyake event. Whether the sun could produce another one tomorrow with zero advance warning, or whether one is already statistically overdue. Solar physicist Valentina Zharkova and other researchers studying long-term solar cycles have pointed out that our continuous, high-precision satellite monitoring of the sun only goes back to roughly the 1960s and 70s, a blink of an eye compared to the sun's actual behavioral range.
We've been watching this star closely for less than a single human lifetime multiplied by 2, and it's already shown us it's capable of things our satellites have never once recorded. If a Miyake-scale event hit modern Earth, the Carrington event wouldn't even be a useful comparison. We'd be looking at a planetary infrastructure failure event. Satellites disabled en masse, transcontinental power grids down for an unknown duration, GPS and financial systems offline, simultaneously across every time zone at once. This is the part of the story where the ancient apocalyptic language and the modern scientific reality start to rhyme in a way that gives me actual chills. Revelation's sixth seal doesn't just describe a black sun, it describes the stars of heaven falling and every mountain and island moved out of their places, language many scholars read as describing a total breakdown of the visible order of the sky. Substitute satellites for stars and global infrastructure for mountains and islands, and a Bronze Age to Iron Age author describing the scariest thing he could imagine starts sounding uncomfortably like a 21st century space weather briefing. I want to be very clear here. No legitimate scientist is telling you the Book of Revelation predicted solar physics. That's not the claim. The claim, the actual documented, unsettling claim, is that human beings have been independently terrified by the sun going dark across completely disconnected civilizations for completely different physical reasons for thousands of years. And modern instrumentation have now confirmed that the next version of this event isn't hypothetical. It's a measurable, probability-rated risk sitting on NASA's and NOAA's active watch list right now in 2026.
Now, here's a twist a lot of documentaries on this topic completely skip, and it's worth understanding because you will run into this phrase again if you keep researching. The black sun, Schwarze Sonne in German, is also the name of an occult symbol, a sunburst-shaped mosaic of 12 interlocking sig runes installed in the floor of Wewelsburg Castle in Germany in the early 1930s under Heinrich Himmler's direction. It has no connection whatsoever to the astronomical phenomena we've been discussing. It was invented as a piece of Nazi-era pseudo-mystical iconography, and in the decades since, it's been adopted as a symbol by white supremacist and neo-Nazi movements worldwide, most notoriously worn by the perpetrator of the 2019 Christchurch mosque attacks. I'm including this for one reason only: clarity, not conspiracy. If you go searching Black Sun online, you will run into this symbol mixed in with actual astrophysics, and the two have zero relationship to each other beyond sharing two English words. One is a Bronze Age religious metaphor turned modern space weather risk. The other is a 20th century extremist symbol with a well-documented, entirely separate origin. Serious researchers keep these completely distinct, and now you can too. Let's land this somewhere useful, because the whole point of telling you this story is that unlike every generation before us, the panicked Connecticut legislators, the terrified Byzantine monks, we're the first humans in history who don't have to interpret a dark sun through guesswork and scripture. We can actually watch it coming. Right now, in addition to DSCOVR, NASA operates the Parker Solar Probe, which has flown closer to the sun's surface than any human-made object in history, directly sampling the solar wind to understand how these eruptions actually form at the source. The European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter is doing complementary work, capturing the first-ever images of the sun's poles. NOOA's Space Weather Prediction Center issues real public storm watches on a scale from G1 to G5, the same way the National Weather Service issues hurricane categories, and utility companies genuinely use these warnings to take transformers offline preemptively during major events. There's also active research into a next-generation early warning system that wouldn't just track the sun from a single point a million miles out, but from multiple angles simultaneously.
Because right now, if a coronal mass ejection launches directly at Earth head-on, it's notoriously difficult to measure its true speed and severity until it's almost on top of us. Closing that gap is considered one of the highest priorities in space weather research today. So, here's where I land on the sixth seal. I don't think Colonel Davenport was foolish for calling for candles in that Connecticut State House in 1780. I think he was a man doing the only rational thing available to him with the information he had. Stay calm, keep working, light what light you can. The sun going dark has terrified nearly every civilization that's ever witnessed it, for reasons ranging from wildfire smoke to volcanic winters that killed tens of millions, to electromagnetic storms that can reach out 93 million miles and reduce a modern superpower to 19th century infrastructure in about 17 hours. What's changed isn't the sun, it's us. We finally have the instruments to see the punch coming. Whether we act on that warning in time is a different question entirely. And if you ask the people at NOOA's Space Weather Prediction Center, that's the part that actually keeps them up at night. If this kind of story, where ancient apocalyptic fear turns out to have a genuine documented scientific twin hiding in the historical record, is that kind of rabbit hole, that's exactly what this channel digs into every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment. If you had 15 minutes of warning before a Carrington-level storm hit, what's the first thing you'd do? I read every single one, and I'll pin my favorites. Stay curious. I'll see you in the next video.